6 historical thinking concepts. This is Professor John's history class, and they are discussing about thinking skills. One of the students says, subjects like science are based on critical thinking. The teacher answers, subjects like history foster critical thinking as well. Yes, history is not just a collection of mere facts. It was Peter Sexias and Morton in their book, The Benchmarks of Historical Thinking, who discussed about the big 6 historical thinking concepts. These big 6 historical thinking concepts develop historical thinking by helping students to establish historical significance, use primary source evidence, identify continuity and change, analyze cause and consequence, take historical perspectives, and understand the ethical dimension of historical interpretations. Let us look at each of these 6 historical thinking concepts one by one. Establishing historical significance. The historian or a student of history can decide what is important and what is not important from the historical point of view. Only significant events should be included in the study. Events that can be linked to larger trends are considered as important. So what makes an event historically significant? 1. The event should be a profound event. That is, it should deeply affect many people. It should be a durable event and not just a fleeting event. And it must be relevant to subsequent history. World War I, for example, is a significant event because it has affected many people, it was a durable event, and it changed the course of further history. Here are some more examples of events of historical significance. Mangal Pandey shooting his officer, Mahatma Phule calling a strike of barbers, the Boston Tea Party, the 9/11 attacks, the bombing of Hiroshima. These are events of historical significance because they were profound, they affected many people, the effect was long-lasting, and the event affected subsequent events. The second historical thinking concept, use of primary source evidence. Primary sources are first-hand sources, and they give us glimpses of the past. Primary sources need to be interpreted in the context of the events that occurred. To interpret these sources, students of history should be critical thinkers. They should use analysis and synthesis, be unbiased and reflective. It is good to compare one primary source with other sources, and remember, primary sources often offer you unfiltered access to historical events. For example, to understand World War I, one can refer to archives, newspapers of that time, perhaps letters written by soldiers or government documents. Look at these two primary sources. On the left, we have the seal that was issued during the coronation of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. On the right side, we have a drawing that indicates the structure of the Vasai fort, and this is dated 1534. Both these are primary sources, and they help us to understand the history of that time. The third historical thinking concept is to identify continuity and change. We must remember that history is a complex mix of continuity and change. Many of these changes are quick. Some changes could be gradual. Take, for example, the discovery of new lands in 1490. Though new lands were discovered in 1490, this event was preceded by many voyages that were undertaken right from 1453, when Constantinople was conquered by the Turks. Some of these were successes, some of these were failures. Thus, history becomes a complex mix of continuity and change. Our independence in 1947 was preceded by several movements that were held earlier. Inventions in science in the 19th century were also preceded by many events that occurred before this. For example, World War I is a series of connected events. We had colonialism, we had secret pacts, and then we had the immediate cause in the form of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. The next historical thinking concept is to analyze cause and consequence. Examination of history involves questions of how and why. One looks for causes and what led to a particular consequence. In history, one needs to look at the role of human beings, both as individuals as well as groups that shaped an event. The Dandi March, for example. When we look at this event, we look at causes, and the causes were the discontent among people and the levying of a tax on salt. This was a historical event because it had significant consequence. It shaped the further events in our freedom struggle. Yet another example we can take is that of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. There were a number of causes that led to this assassination. And the immediate consequence of this was it led to the outbreak of the First World War. Taking historical perspectives is also one of the historical thinking concepts. What do we mean by taking historical perspectives? It means that we try to understand the event amidst the social, cultural, intellectual, and emotional settings that shaped people's lives and actions in the past. Any event in history is shaped by multiple factors. Take, for example, the social reform that occurred in 18th century Maharashtra. There was a social background to it. There was a cultural background involved in this social reform. For example, our saint poets, they wrote a number of poems, and this, for example, helped to bring about social reform. There was intellectual input. Mahatma Phule and others created this intellectual input through their interactions with people. There were emotional settings involved in this social reform. Similarly, you can think about the French Revolution and try to understand what were the social, cultural, intellectual, and emotional settings that fostered or that helped the French Revolution to occur. Understanding ethical dimensions of historical interpretations is the sixth historical thinking concept. By this we mean we reflect over historical injustice of the past. We think what they mean for us today. We should expect to learn something from the past to resolve the ethical issues of today. Consider the atrocities of Dalits in medieval India. Consider the killing or the massacre of Jews in concentration camps. So when we study an event, we also think about the ethical dimensions of these historical events and try to interpret them, finding out what relevance they have for us today. After having seen these six historical thinking concepts, a student in Professor John's class says, indeed, understanding history must be based on six historical thinking concepts. Yes, history is definitely a subject that can foster critical thinking if one applies these six thinking concepts. Professor John has a small assignment for his class. You too can do this assignment. Choose any one event in history and examine it from the point of view of the six historical thinking concepts. Thank you.